Hello, genealogist. It's Craig again from Just Genealogy. Today, I'd like to talk about the United States Navy in the Great War. Recently, I talked about the Marine Corps, so it was time to work on the Navy. This is a display that's shown on the website of the Naval Museum at the Naval Yard in Washington, D.C., that relates to World War One. But let's talk about the war for a bit. So in 1914, there were 147 naval ships. About another 78 were added to the fleet before the end of the war. Most of the fleet stayed in American waters, largely because there wasn't any way to operate them overseas because of fuel oil shortages. However, we did have 5 coal burning battleships, so they were able to go over to Europe, and they served in the British Grand Fleet as the 6th Battle Squadron, or U.S. Battleship Division 9. Battleship Division 6 was based in Ireland to counter German at-sea operations against troop transports, so we had 2 groups over there. In addition to that, there was a Navy global presence, everywhere, just as we're always everywhere. So probably the most significant contribution of the Navy during the Great War was that it escorted and transported 2 million U.S. soldiers to France. A great majority of these were in the last 6 months of the war, with almost no loss to German submarines. But was true, by July 1918, U.S. troops were arriving in France at a rate of about 10,000 per day, roughly half in U.S. shipping and half in other Allied shipping. Although the Army and the Marines had significant success on the battlefield against the now diminished German forces, it was the German High Command's realization that there was nothing that was going to stem the tide of Americans constantly showing up on the shores of France day by day. And some people believe that's what actually caused the Germans to sue for armistice. So who was in the Navy at this time? Well, Navy muster rolls do exist, but they're not on Ancestry. Those that are on Ancestry began in 1938, so you'll have to go to the National Archives to look at muster rolls. We do have some information on casualties. The Navy suffered 431 killed and 819 wounded, according to official reports. The U.S. Coast Guard, which was attached in the Navy during the war, as they are during most wars, lost 121 men in action, thereby suffering proportionally the greatest loss of any U.S. service during the war. There is a government printing office document, originally I believe a Secretary of War document, that is officers and enlisted men of the United States Navy who lost their lives during the World War from April 6, 1917 to November 11th, 1918, and it's in 2 volumes. It is available from Heritage Books. It's available in Google Books. It's available in Haiti Trust. It's available everywhere. What is available on Ancestry is Navy casualties, lost and wrecked ships during the period, during a much larger period. And I recommend that if you're interested in Navy casualties, that's where you look. One of my favorite ships is the USS Cyclops. I have an author by the name of Marvin Barish who had an uncle or great uncle on the Cyclops. So he has an interest in it. And this is from the Navy Casualties books, and it begins to list those who is that of the USS Cyclops that was lost at sea in June of 1918. Everyone was lost. The ship sank. The Cyclops was a collier. There's a picture of it on the front of Marvin Barish's book. Marvin had a great uncle who was on the Cyclops and was lost at sea. He has probably the most fantastic single focused book on a ship in the form of a 2.5-inch hardback kind of thing with the USS Cyclops. And then he determined after we published the first book that there was more to write, so he published a second volume, which is a little smaller in paperback. Other sources for information in regards to Navy deaths during the war are in the record group 52, the records of the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, entry 37, which includes casualty lists. It also includes burial records from 1898 to 1931. So these are bound in volumes. This happens to be the burial record for the USS Comfort, which is a Navy hospital ship. And these are 2 pages wide, and it provides you with the name of the sailor, the name of what ship they came from, what their rank was, what their native land was, what their date of birth was, what their date of death was, what happened to them. And then there's a second page, what their diagnosis was. Many of them were influenza. And then there's a second page that tells when the death certificate was forwarded, what friends or relatives, next of kin were notified, the name of the mortuary that took care of them, their number on a hospital register, and then remarks. Usually the remarks include the name and address of where the body was transported to. Here's a picture of the Comfort. There was a sister ship, the Mercy, but they didn't look anything alike. Whenever I deal with a ship, first of all, I like to get a picture, and pictures of naval ships are pretty much readily available, especially from the website Dictionary of American Fighting Ships, done by the Naval Historical Center. So here's a picture of the Comfort. This one is actually from the Wikipedia page. As I say, I like to trace the history. So originally the Comfort was the SS Havana, part of the Ward Line, and it was a passenger ship. Then it became the USAT Havana. That's a U.S. Army transport. So it was being used to move troops back and forth from the United States to Europe. And then it became the USS Comfort. It was transferred to the Navy and became a Navy hospital ship. Then after the war, it was sold in 1925. By 1927, it was again the SS Havana. Then in 1935, it got changed to the SS Yucatan. And then in 1945, it was the SS Aguilian. And it would then become, during World War II, again, a U.S. Army transport ship of the same name. And eventually, it would become a hospital ship again, only this time it would be a U.S. Army hospital ship, the Shamrock. And eventually it would get scrapped in 1948. So here we have a ship that started out as a passenger ship, became an Army transport ship, became a naval hospital ship, went back to doing whatever it did in passage between the wars, and then it became an Army transport ship again, and then it became an Army hospital ship. Usually it's the other way around. Usually Army hospital ships, if their changed status, became Navy hospital ships, but that's okay. So this gem of a ship has a very interesting history. Now, there were only a few naval ships lost during the war. The largest was an armored cruiser by the name of USS San Diego. It sank 9 miles from Fire Island Lighthouse. At the time, they thought they'd struck a mine. All of a sudden, the side of the ship blew out, and they didn't know what it was. But now that they have found the wreck, they now think that it was a sub that actually took them out. So that Fire Island is just off of New York. It took 28 minutes for it to sink. 1,177 survived, only 6 died. Originally, the San Diego's name was the USS California, but they needed the name California for a battleship, so they renamed the USS California to the USS San Diego. And that shouldn't be an equal sign up there. That it should be CA-6, not CA=6. Then there was a destroyer, the USS Jacob Jones. It was sunk by a U-boat, U-53, which picked up two members of the crew and then radioed Queenstown Island the coordinates of the sinking, and other ships were able to get there and pick people up, but only 66 people are lost. The designation DD, which is how we normally think of destroyers today, doesn't come into being until after 1920. So during the war, this was known as Destroyer Number 61, but it was referred to after 1920 as DD-61, although it was never during its lifetime DD-61. There also was a Navy troop transport ship, the USS President Lincoln, that was originally a German steamer, the President Lincoln, but it was seized in New York Harbor in 1917. It was sunk by U-90 after dropping some troops off, and it was headed back to the U.S. And it got beyond what was thought to be the safety zone for shipping, and its destroyer escort had left it, and it was sunk. There was a loss of only 26 of the 715 people who were aboard. There also was a U.S. Coast Guard ship, the Tampa, which was sunk in the Bay of Bristol by UB-91, and all hands were lost. There were 101 Coast Guard, 4 Navy, and 16 British personnel on board. The reason that I really wanted to talk about this today had nothing to do with anything that I just talked to you about. While I was giving a talk on World War I a couple of weeks ago, I was reminded of the Naval Guns. And we got into a discussion about, I described them as 16-inch guns, and then I was reminded by someone that there weren't any 16-inch guns yet, and there weren't, but that these must have been 14-inch guns, and in fact, they were 14-inch naval guns. So let's talk about what these guns were and what they did. During the war, naval personnel manned 5 Mark I 14-inch naval guns in the American Expeditionary Force. These guns operated as single gun batteries to target key infrastructure behind German lines, such as railway junctions. Each battery, which would be a single turret, was composed of a locomotive, a gun car, ammunition cars, supporting equipment cars, and accommodations for the crew under the command of a United States Navy lieutenant. The overall command of all 5 guns was under the command of Rear Admiral Charles Pershall Plunkett. These were delivered by ship, and then these trains were assembled in August of 1918. Here's what one looks like. The picture doesn't actually give you a really good idea about how these things operated, but the diagram does. The Mark I required that they put themselves in position and then dig a hole in between the tracks so that the barrel could in fact go down into that hole to lessen the recoil. So that I thought was pretty cool. They fired 782 shells on 25 separate days, and the shells ranged from 27 to 36 kilometers. That's how far they fired. They were only fired for specific strategic purposes to conserve the barrel life, and they used smaller guns whenever possible, but largely because of how hard it was to get a 14-inch barrel to them. And the last shot was fired by Battery 4 at 10:57 and 30 seconds a.m. on the 11th of November, 1918, timed to land just before the scheduled armistice at 11 a.m. Kind of cruel when I think about it, but I guess this would be considered the largest parting shot of World War I. The Army actually was so impressed by these guns that they ordered 6 units themselves, but the war ended before they could be shipped to France. Now, what they did do a little later, these were already in development and already created, but they didn't make it to France. This is the Mark II gun, which was designed you didn't have to dig the hole in the tracks. basically was set up so that it could stand just being there and absorb the recoil within the gun mount itself. So you didn't have to dig any holes. There is a Mark I sitting on the Washington Navy Yard. I don't know whether this is a real one or whether this is a replica. My sense is it should be a real one, but I just don't know. I remember walking by it so many times and just not even thinking about it when I was stationed in D.C. and would go to the Washington Navy Yard on occasion. I was too interested in what was inside the museum than what was outside the museum. That happens sometimes. Well, now we've covered the Marine Corps. Now we've covered the United States Navy, and for that matter, the Coast Guard. So we will, the next time we start talking about World War I, we'll start talking about the pieces of before the war, recruit training, getting to Europe, fighting in Europe, getting back from Europe, and demobilization at some point. So this has been Craig with Just Genealogy, converting people doing genealogy into genealogists day by day. If you have anything to add to this, or if you got anything that you'd like me to talk about, I'm sorry my voice is so gravelly. Hopefully my voice has improved. I've moved the microphone 18 inches to 24 inches closer to me at the request of somebody. Let's see how it works out. Hopefully I'm not too loud, and hopefully I'm not too soft. So y'all have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.